Okay, we finished basically Kiddush. Let's go to Lechem Mishneh. Now we know Lechem Mishneh is, we're supposed to have two challahs every time you eat a meal on Shabbos, like we learned yesterday. Even if you have 5 meals on Shabbos, whatever, every time you wash on Shabbos, you need to have Lechem Mishneh. That applies to men and women, by the way. Which means, if a lot of women are unaware of this, if women sit down, let's say to Shalosh Shudas, they come to Shul, and they can't just take a challah roll and make a meitzi. They have to take 2 challahs and make Lechem Mishneh. Unless, if the guy, whatever, the rabbi, whoever it is, will make 2 challahs and say it loud, and then he has in mind everybody for the Lechem Mishneh. Otherwise, women need to have Lechem Mishneh, men need to have Lechem Mishneh, because of the double portion of man that fell.
I think last year we say once that if on a table somebody do Lechem Mishneh, then they can do bracha only on.
I said, if one person, they all listen to the bracha though.
Oh, but anyway, they make the bracha by themselves.
They need to listen to the bracha, even though they make their own bracha, but when they in order for them to be Yetzer Lechem Mishneh, by the way, it's another interesting din. Let's say you didn't even wash yet. Let's say there's a bunch of people, whatever, and the head of the household washed, and he's in a rush, whatever, and he makes a Meitzah and Lechem Mishneh, and a bunch of people didn't wash yet. So they're still Yetzer Lechem Mishneh. So they have to wash, make a Meitzah and a piece of challah. But the aspect of Lechem Mishneh, because they heard, even though they didn't even wash yet, they washed, they heard the bracha of Hameitzi, they fulfilled the mitzvah Lechem Mishneh. What? No, they don't need to eat from that. The custom is to give him a piece because it's Hameitzi. But even if not, you don't. Because that's the bracha, that's the piece the guy made the Lechem Mishneh bracha on. What? There's a minute to give everybody from that, but you don't have to.
It's not enough.
No.
It's okay, right?
Yeah. What?
You only have one challah. Can you break it in 2 and something like that?
We'll get to that in a second.
The second earlier.
Huh?
The second earlier.
There's nothing as complete as a broken one. Okay, lechatchila, what? Well, you can't learn the whole Torah on 1 foot. The prospective convert did it with Hillel, not with Shammai. Okay, now, what happens if a challah, this applies more to a matzah. What happens, you have a matzah, but the matzah is cracked down the middle. It's not broken, but it's cracked. Or you can have a challah that's cracked also, but it's more common by a matzah. So now, if it's cracked, I don't want to rip a dollar bill. Let's say it's cracked, is it still considered whole? So the din is, if you pick up the weaker part, on the weaker side, and it still stays whole, it's a whole challah. If it doesn't, then you have a broken one anyway. But if it's strong enough that even when you pick up, in other words, it's not 3/4 of the way broken, then your lav dafka is going to fit. Or according to a certain opinion, what happens, this applies also, it's more practical by a matzah, but same thing applies by a challah. What happens if something is missing from the challah? Or a matzah, a little chip at the end. So many paschim, it's a machlekes, but many paschim hold, if it's less than 1/48 of the matzah, it's still considered whole. Still considered whole. In fact, what a lot of people do before Pesach, let's say there's a shortage of complete matzahs, and there's a few chipped matzahs, what they'll do before Pesach, or you can do on Pesach also, not Shabbos stuff. You take a match, and where it's cracked, chipped a little bit, you burn it, and then it's like a fresh, new matzah. That also works in Allah. Yeah, it also works in Allah. Now, what happens? 1 second. What happens if the challahs stick together in the baking? A lot of times, you bake, especially the challah rolls. Even when you get them, because they expand, so they stick together. So the din is, halachically, they're considered separate challahs because they're sold as separate units. It's a very interesting shaila, which is discussed in Poskim. A challah, pull-apart challah. You see, great minds think alike.
Which one?
Pull apart.
Oh, like
pull
the
apart.
round one that
Yeah. Years ago in New York, they didn't have pull apart. They had section challahs, like 8 sections, So now the question is, can you take apart one section or pull apart? Pull apart, is it counted as a Lechem Mishneh? So there's a whole discussion in Poskim. In fact, there is one place in Shalom Meshiv, he brings down, there's one opinion that says that even while it's together, it's counted as 2. But many Poskim hold that because a pull apart, or a section challah as it's called, is sold as one unit, it really should not be able to, you shouldn't really pull it apart, unless if you have nothing else and you need Lechem Mishneh, so then you could pull them apart. Because the fact that they're sold as one unit.
But they're sold for you separate,
No, but that's why some people say, but lechatchila, some people say the fact that it's sold by one unit. By the way, even matzahs, what do you think? They bake the matzah like this?
They break it.
The matzah is baked a massive. I'm not talking about hand matzah, shmur. I'm talking about the boxes, the machine matzahs. They're baked on big things. And then they cut them. But over there, they're whole because they're sold as separate units. They're sold as separate units, and therefore it's considered separate challah. If it's burnt, it's also good. Okay, we said, according to certain opinions, as long as it's less than 1/48 of the entire challah, it's good.
If the one is frozen,
What?
if the one that you're not going to eat is frozen, is that the muksa or is it considered as a second?
Why should it be muktzah?
I don't know, maybe it's frozen, maybe it's not.
Okay, we're not learning muktzah now. So Poskim write that a frozen challah could be counted as a second challah. That's what they do right. If it was, baked and frozen, so then you're allowed to take it out, and even though it's still frozen, you can use it as a Lechem Mishneh. There's another discussion. This guy doesn't bring down. I don't know why he doesn't bring down these practical things. What happens if you have 2 challahs and they're both in plastic bags? Now, okay, obviously the one you're cutting, you're going to take out of the plastic bag. But should I take out the second challah from the plastic bag also?
No.
Yes.
See, there's a big argument amongst the scholars. So the answer is, Lechatchila Poskim say, those that talk about it say it's preferable to take it out. Because it's just more respectable that you're doing it properly, but the evidence, if you left it in the bag, it's still counted as a second challah. The reason why frozen challah is not muktzah, because it's edible on Shabbos. You can let it stay out for a few hours, it defrosts. Frozen food that's raw, frozen chicken, frozen meat, because they're not edible, so on Shabbos they're muktzah, and Yom Tov they're not, because Yom Tov you could cook. But Shabbos they're muktzah because you can't do anything with it. What?
You have 2 challahs in front of you to cover when you make kiddush, but you really want to make Lechem Mishneh on 2 challahs that are under left, and you just want it to stay warm. So when you finish making kiddush, you bring those, which were not the ones that were in front of you when you make kiddush.
It's not a halachic problem because you're not making kiddush over the challahs. But the appropriate thing is the challahs that you want to use should be there by kiddush.
Can you not have challahs in front of you when you make kiddush?
That's what I'm saying. Halachically, if you didn't, you're still yaitze. But it's chatchila better to have the challahs there in front of the, yeah. Okay, now, what happens, you don't have 2 challahs, you have 1.5 challahs. So then, you have no choice, you use 1.5 challahs. What happens if you have, an interesting thing, what happens if you have a challah that's exactly cut in half? Perfect cut. That if you stick it together, it looks whole. So it's not lechatchila to do it. It says what you could do is take the 2 halves and stick like a toothpick between them just to hold it together. And then if you need to, that could be counted as a challah by itself, a whole challah by itself. Because it looks like a whole challah. But that's only if you don't have any, not with 3 segments of a challah, just if it's cut in half. What happens if you don't have any whole ones? So then, what happens a lot of time, by the way, you have one Lechem Mishneh, and then somebody pops in later, and there's no complete Chalas left. So then, the then is you take two pieces and you put them together. One side, there's a famous story of the Friedrich Rebbe. Somebody once came to the Friedrich Rebbe to Verbringen. Don't forget, it was a very small crowd then. The Friedrich Rebbe asked him, he walked a far distance, either from Williamsburg or Brownsville to 770. The Friedrich Rebbe asked him if he made Kiddush yet. He said no. The Friedrich Rebbe gave him his bracha to make Kiddush. Then he said, but there were no more chalas, whole chalas left. So the Friedrich Rebbe took two pieces and gave it to him. And he said in Yiddish, there's nothing as complete as a broken one, meaning a broken heart, a broken person. So the Friedrich Rebbe gave him the two halves and said, there's nothing as complete as two broken things. But it says in Halacha, the poskim being down, what happens if you don't have, that's all you have, that's all you have.
Based on what you said before, that there's lots of difference between bread and corn, can you take two slices of bread, put in the oven, and
No, that's only b'diavad, if you have nothing else. No, l'chatchila you can't do that. All these things l'chatchila you shouldn't do. Okay, what happens if somebody doesn't have two chalas, but they have danishes? So you can't wash, obviously, but so you could take two cakes, two cookies, or whatever. No, it has to be a kazayas or something. That you take two danishes together and you make a mezainis on two danishes. It's also lechem. There's another issue about possible bekitz, not for now, it's for later. But there's another issue of possible bekitz, which according to certain opinions of the Maisi, if you can use it for Lechem Mishneh. But use two broken pieces. Okay, so now they write, what does he quote this from? Okay, what happens if somebody has a challah and a cake, and he makes a meitzah and the challah, you should eat a little piece of the cake also. Now, why? Because that's what you're making the bracha, because if you mitzvah it, you want to show that it has a din of bread, so to speak. So, now, how big is a Lechem Mishneh supposed to be? So, Chatchila has to be a size of a kazayas, which is an ounce. But the average poskin, there are certain poskin, even if it's less than a kazayas, it's still called Lechem Mishneh. But you have to be careful. A lot of times the bakeries sell these tiny, tiny rolls. You have to really know if it's kazayas. It should be kabetza, but you have to know if it's taka. Okay.